Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. Ryan is a family man, first and foremost, but he's also a pastor, publisher, and serial entrepreneur. This podcast will help you think, work, and create like never before.
Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. I'm Ryan Frank. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have an amazing conversation for you that I had with Brian Dollar. But before I jump into that conversation, I want to invite you and your children's ministry team to the Kids Matter Conference. The Kids Matter Conference is our annual event that we hold outside of Nashville, Tennessee. It's for children's ministry leaders and their teams. It's coming September 12th, 13th, and 14th, 2023, and all the information can be found at thekidsmatterconference.com. If you're a children's ministry leader, you need to get to an event like ours because, number one, you're going to find a lot of great networking opportunities. Over 3,000 people will be in attendance from all around the globe. People at small churches, medium-sized churches, mega churches. You're also going to have some great resourcing opportunities. We have over 100 ministry partners that will be there with the latest and greatest in curriculum, worship resources, furniture, training, events, education, and so much more. There will be a lot of great opportunities for professional development with over 200 specialized ministry breakouts to choose from. You're going to find a lot of great practical training to help you, whether you are working with early childhood age kids, preteens, special needs kids, whether you're the leader, whether you're brand new, or whether you've been doing this for years. You'll find encouragement. One thing we love to do at the Kids Matter Conference is bless and encourage this community. This is why we give away a car. Someone will literally leave with a car. And there are all kinds of other ways that you'll be blessed and you'll be inspired. With our main stage sessions, our breakouts, our resource providers, networking opportunities, you'll be inspired to go back home and make a difference like never before. Get your tickets if you don't have them. You can learn more at thekidsmatterconference.com. Don't miss this premier event for children's ministry leaders and their teams. Well, friends, today we're talking about leading from the shadows. How do you lead when you're not in charge? And my guest today is Brian Dollar. Brian is the associate pastor at a wonderful Assembly of God church in North Little Rock, Arkansas. He is the creator of High Voltage Kids Ministry. He's an author, he's a speaker, and he's a dear friend. And today we dig into the nuts and bolts of leading when you're not in charge, mistakes that you can make, the right decisions that you can make. How can you influence your pastor or your leader? How can you influence change when you're not the person in charge? And so much more. I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I sure did. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road. Here's my conversation with Brian Dollar. Hey, what's up, Brian? Welcome to the podcast.
What's going on, Ryan? I'm so excited to be a guest. I've watched a lot of them and listened to a lot of your episodes. I'm glad to be on here.
Well, thank you. Sure love you guys. Thank you for everything that you do in your church, and not only in your church, but just in the global church. And so many of the podcast listeners, for those watching, I know have been impacted by High Voltage Kids Ministry and your curriculum and your resources. And well, you just have touched so many people. So thank you, Brian. Sure think a lot of you and Cherith and everything that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you for those kind words. And we feel the same way about you and Beth.
Oh, thanks. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows Brian Dollar. You know, Brian, we've been friends for a long time. Our families have hung out. We've had the opportunity to minister together. But if there's somebody that's not familiar with you and your family and just your ministry, would you introduce yourself? Tell us about your kids. Tell us about your church. I'd love to hear about High Voltage, and just take a few minutes and unpack your ministry journey.
I would love to do that. And when you mentioned that a while ago, I was realizing we're close to 20 years being friends.
Isn't that crazy?
We go way back.
That's pretty special.
I remember it was back when Kids Matter was just one little table at CPC.
You're right.
It was was when I first
Yep.
met you. So it was pretty
I love
exciting
that.
to be what
Yep.
all has happened
Yep.
in both of our lives. But, I started in full-time ministry in 95. I was actually part-time kids pastor starting in 1992 at a church in Dallas while I was in Bible college.
Mhm.
I ended up coming on full-time and being there for several more years. And then in 1999, I left Texas and came to Arkansas here at North Little Rock First Assembly. At the time, the church was being led by Alton Garrison, who went on to be the number 2 guy in the entire Assemblies of God, and he's doing great things, leading Acts 2 now and all that.
Okay.
But Pastor Rod Loy was the executive pastor at the time and became the lead pastor, and that's really who I've worked under for the last 21 years. I've been here 23 and a half, and almost 22 of
That's
those years
crazy.
have been under Pastor Rod. And
Yeah.
man, you talk about just an incredible leader and
Mhm.
somebody who inspires you and challenges you every day. He's one of those leaders, which is why I've been able to work for him for so long and really can't imagine working for anybody else.
Yeah.
If there's ever a transition where in my life where I'll have to follow somebody else, it'll be tough because I've had one of the best pastors ever.
That's
But it was back in, goodness, I came here as the kids pastor in 99, and I had already been kind of writing a little bit of my kids church material, not everything. We were still using some that I'd get from different publishing companies, but I started having a real desire to do something that was a little more cutting edge, a little more. This is back before media was really even a part of curriculum. It was just you get a notebook with some puppet tracks, maybe.
Yep.
But I wanted to start incorporating video and graphics and just some more interactive elements. So I started writing more and more, and it was actually my pastor who really challenged me to try to put it out there a little wider and see if more people would be interested in using it.
Mhm.
And boy, before I knew it, we had just blown up, and we are now in over 15,000 churches around the world. Just continued to grow every single year, and I'm just amazed at how God's used what one small team here in North Little Rock, Arkansas, has come up with, and it just continues to expand and grow. And so we added preschool. We were elementary for the longest time, and then we added preschool curriculum. And so now, the way our church works is that Pastor Rod and I, since 2005, we actually have planned our sermon calendar together, in which I take his sermons and make them palatable for the elementary and write our whole curriculum based on what the adults are learning. So the whole family's on a learning journey together. Well, when we added preschool, we now do that for birth through,
That's crazy.
the 90s, so from birth to adult, everybody on the weekend is learning the exact same passage, the same principles and concepts. And it's been amazing. We've been doing that since 2005. Every week.
Isn't that crazy, Brian? Yeah.
Isn't that nuts? I mean, it's crazy
is.
to think about it that we've been doing it that long.
And let me just interject. And, if you're in children's ministry and you're not familiar with Brian's curriculum, High Voltage Kids, you need to go check it out, download a sample lesson. It's something that we use frequently at our church, and I love to use it when I speak at camps or retreats with kids. In fact, a couple weeks ago, Brian, you text me because I had tweeted something about who we are in Christ, and you were like, "Man, that line sounds just like our curriculum from this one series. That's awesome." And you didn't know, and I was like, "Yeah, it's because I just taught that yesterday, and it was fresh on my brain." Right?
Oh man, I was like, dude, the wording is exactly the same. That was awesome. And then you're like, well, that's because it's straight from your stuff.
Pretty much. I love that.
I did too.
So go check out High Voltage Kids Ministry. Now, Brian, you for 20 some years, which I think is amazing. You've been at the same church.
Yeah.
Working for the same pastor for majority of that time. You guys have a wonderful relationship. And the topic of our podcast today is leading when you're not in charge. And, a lot of times when you think about being an assistant pastor, or, if you're in the marketplace, you think about I'm not the CEO or the owner of the company or the manager.
Yeah.
And you think about leading when you're not in charge and being maybe in the shadows, it can be, it's easy to focus on the negatives, right?
Right.
Well, if I would do this, or if he would do this, or she would do this. But Brian, from your experience now, 20 some years working for a pastor, leading, even though you may not technically be in charge, what are some of the benefits?
Yeah, and I guess part of what I failed to mention in kind of sharing my ministry journey is that, I came here in 99 and all the way to 2016, I was the kids pastor here. And
Yes,
then
that's right.
I was asked, Pastor Rod asked me to transition to the associate pastor. And, I was still, and actually still am, leading all of our camp. We have 11 campuses and I lead all of the kids ministries of those campuses, but I'm the associate pastor for our North Little Rock, our kind of central campus.
Yeah.
And certainly that was a big transition, but a lot of the reason why that he asked me to make that transition is because of kind of the track record that I had for the first 17 years that I was here. And it was because I was someone who led, even though I wasn't quote unquote in charge. And I think a lot of times when we think of leading, we're often kind of only thinking of our downline. We're thinking of those who work directly under us. And that's really, when you think about it, that's really only a third of leading, a third of what we do, because you always have three relationships, or at least your relationships go in three directions: up, down, and then sideways, your peers across. And leadership is influence. We've heard that quote so many times from John Maxwell. Well, how do you build influence except by building relationships? And so I think, you talk about it, one of the negatives of leading in the shadows. I think so often we have our own little pity party for ourselves, and we sit in the office with our door closed, just waiting on our leader to come and assign us something. And if they don't, we're like, well, I guess they don't trust me. And that's silly, because if you're sitting there waiting, that's not leading. Leading is whether you have the authority or not, you step out and you do what is needed. If you're sitting there waiting on the title before you lead, then you're never going to lead, because that's not how it works. You got to lead well, and then you'll get the title. And I think that's the reason why I ended up, making the transition that I did. But let me more specifically answer your question, since I kind of meandered there.
No, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, one of the positives of leading when you're not the one who is, quote unquote, the leader, is that you get to lead without having to bear the entire weight of the organization on your shoulders. Because one thing that Pastor Rod, says a lot to those of us who are kind of on the executive leadership team, is that, it's a lot further than 20 steps from your desk to mine. There's a lot more of a change than just geographical location whenever you suddenly are in the driver's seat. And there's so much pressure when you think about the fact that every decision, if you're the person in charge of the entire organization, every decision you make affects individuals, affects livelihoods, affects families, affects the ability of the people to even put food on the table for their families. That's a huge responsibility. And, when you're somebody who's, on the team, but leading, you're able to, spitball some ideas. You're able to lead in a way that doesn't necessarily affect the entire organization. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits of being able to lead when you're not the person. Jesus, he was a great example of that, because he didn't have, he left all kind of authority and title that he had when he left heaven, and he came to earth. He was just a little baby, and he grew as a person. He had to gain that influence through example and through leading without a title. He didn't suddenly, become King of Kings. He was just the dude from Nazareth, but after several years of leading by example, Well, that's when he began to be given the title of "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." That was after many years of living and leading without the title. So I think there's a lot of benefit to leading without the person in charge title. But don't wait on authority and a title. Just start to lead now. And I've got some principles that I've kind of put together to help people with that. But I think we'll probably get to that later.
We will. Yeah, you're right, Brian. I don't know why a lot of times we think that we need a title to lead, or we need a title to be in charge. You can have a title on your desk or on your office door or on your business card and not be a leader, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, some of the best leaders, Brian, you're a great one, just serve, find needs, start serving, start building relationships. We are going to move more into the positive as far as how do you influence your leader, and how do you, can you grow when you're not in charge? But I want to stay on this thought for a minute, Brian. What mistakes do you see leaders making when they're not the person in charge? I know you've already mentioned a few, like just sitting around and waiting. Any other thoughts on mistakes that you can make?
Yeah, and I've made them, and I've watched them. It's a lot harder now when I've learned the tough lessons from making these mistakes. When I see it in others, boy, it just makes me cringe, because I'm like, man, I was that guy. But one of the biggest mistakes that I see, especially young leaders make before they're in the first chair, is armchair quarterback. We all know what that is. You're sitting after the play is over, you're watching football on TV, and you're like, well, what did he do that for? He should have done X, Y, and Z. So you always have, once the play is over, you always have what they should have done, right? And we do that as staff members sometimes. We second guess our leaders' decisions. Once something hasn't turned out well, and they made a decision that maybe had some negative reverberations for us or for people in the organization, we say, well, I would have done it that way. Well, they shouldn't have done it that way. Well, sure. Hindsight is always 20/20. And sure, what shouldn't have been done. But if you'd had to make the call in the moment when they made the call, you might have done exactly the same thing. Or you might not even have all the information, and you wouldn't have made the call that you think you would have made.
True.
So armchair quarterbacking is a huge mistake, because number one, it sows seeds of discord in your heart, which is never good for when you're trying to follow somebody. But I think another mistake is exactly what we've kind of touched on already, and that is waiting on authority before you do what needs to be done. I think too many times staff members they see something that needs to be done, but they're like, well, that's not my job, so I'm not going to do it. And I'm sure somebody will take care of it. Well, let me tell you, you do that often enough, and you're not going to become someone that your leader trusts. But if you will do the opposite, and when you see something that needs to be done, handle it, and then let them know that it was handled, well, then you're suddenly going to develop a reputation for somebody who sees things, who handles them, even though it's not your responsibility, and who can be counted on and trusted by your leader. So don't make the mistake of waiting on authority before you do what needs to be done. Take initiative. Do it now. That's a huge thing. And then I guess probably the only other mistake that that comes to mind is kind of focusing on your own thing, being so tunnel vision oriented, or kind of focusing on your silo in the organization, and not even noticing the stuff that's happening in the organization overall. You're never going to be elevated to a position of authority over more if you aren't aware of what's even happening in the organization. So you got to be aware of more than just your thing.
Exactly. That's a good point. And I think as you think about your pastor, your leader, that's one thing that your pastor's doing that you may not be doing or thinking about. I mean, yes, you're looking at your job description, your ministry, your department, where your pastor is considering your ministry, your department, your job description, but he's also considering 25 other ones at the same time, right?
Yeah, at least.
At least. Yeah.
It's so difficult to understand how everything affects everything. And how you just see your slice of the pie, but he sees how this affects this and how this affects this and ultimately affects you. It's so different when you have to look at how it all fits together. And the more you can get yourself outside of your little bubble and truly, ask some questions and find out more about how the organization works, even though you don't have a responsibility for that, you're learning and you're understanding it. And that's going to help you be a better staff member too. Yeah. Not just prepare you for when you might be in charge. It's going to help you do better now as you understand how everything affects everything.
Yeah. Brian, I know you work for, a pastor who's driven and, he's got a lot of great ideas. He's passionate. Right. Yeah. Have you all these years do you feel like you've been able to influence him, even though he's this, driven leader with this big vision? Yeah. And you're called in large part to serve him and serve his vision. Right. Do you feel like you're still able to influence him? Would you talk about that, influencing your leader?
Yeah, I do. Now, I will preface everything that I'm going to say with, I live in a bit of a dream world in that my leader is so team oriented. He is a very driven, visionary. I mean, just one of the best leaders you're ever going to run into. But he is not that way in a vacuum. He has built a team. I've been here 23 years. I was actually sitting at the table a couple of days ago with several of our executive team members, and we realized at the table that the guy at the end who's been here the least amount of time has been here 10 years.
Wow.
So
is that right?
Long-term team.
Neat.
Yeah. I mean, we got a long-term team. And so the reason why we do is because I've got a leader who values teamwork and values other people's voices into the process. But you know what? I realize not everybody's in that situation. And so there are some principles that I think no matter where you find yourself, you can put into place that will help you become somebody who has influence over your leader. First of all, you got to lead yourself first. If you want to have influence with the person above you, you got to show them you can lead you, and they have to look at you as being somebody who can lead yourself well. Some of the ways you can do that is show up on time or really early for everything. You should be one of the first people to church. Your pastor shouldn't be wondering, man, it's 5 minutes before service. Where's he at? Or staff meeting's about to start. Where's the kids pastor? So show up on time. That says, hey, I can lead myself well. I can get myself together. I can actually be there early. Finish. That means don't do a job 98% of the way done. Do it 100% and finish well, where they never have to think, oh, are they going to actually finish this job? Are they going to do this all the way? So if you finish well, you'll gain influence. I think another thing that you got to do if you want to influence the person above you is you got to manage your emotions well. You got to manage your emotions well, and that's part of leading yourself. We all get frustrated. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on is I would communicate my ideas in a tone of frustration, like, I'm so sick and tired of this and this and this happening. Why do we have to do that? And I'd have such a negative attitude, and my emotions were so out of control. Yeah. If you want to be a person of influence, you got to lead yourself first. I don't know about you. You ever struggle communicating things without showing too much emotion and
100%.
And a pessimist?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I find myself that way. But also, if you want to show that you can lead yourself first, be a learner. Be a learner that is always trying to, like I said, find out more about the organization that you're in. Another idea as far as leading yourself first is the area that you do have authority over, that better shine. If you want to influence your leader, you better be rocking and knocking it out of the park in the area that you are in authority over. Because I think so often people who are just kind of mediocre in their current role aspire to be at a higher role, and they also aspire to influence those who are at a higher role. Well, if what you're doing isn't killing it, why are they going to listen to you and think that you have the ideas that are going to help them kill it as an overall organization? So you got to make your authority shine. And I think if you have a track record of success in your own area, you're going to earn the respect to be heard about other areas.
Yes.
So, that's kind of one of the principles, leading yourself first. Do you have anything to add to that?
Brian, I think that's all so true. And by the way, one thing about you, Brian, that I've learned, I've heard you teach this a lot, just on that one point of getting there early. You're always early. You were 5 minutes early today, right? For this recording. You're always
I texted
early.
you and said, I'm waiting in the room.
I know, right? I'm like, man, and I wasn't running late, but I wasn't as early as you were early. Now I love all of that, being there early, finishing well, doing things with excellence. I don't, just because you're on staff or just because you've been hired does not mean you have a seat at the table in the influence
Not automatically.
It's not, that's it. Not automatically. And I teach, the idea that the principle, you've got to show up. Brian, you were talking about it earlier, like seeing outside of your silo or your department. So let's just get really into the minutia for a minute. You're in staff meeting and we're going around the table, and worship leader over here is talking about a challenge that they're having with the choir. But what happens if you show up and you engage in that conversation, even though the choir has nothing to do with you, or your pastor wants to talk about something to do with the senior adults? You could check out and get on your phone, or you could engage and show up in that conversation. And I've learned, Brian, that when you show up and you engage as a team, that all of a sudden your value to your pastor or your leader elevates. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And when you say show up to the conversation, you don't mean show up with all the answers without asking any questions and getting information. You're saying true. Show up and be a part of the back and forth. Because see, I've watched that in staff meeting, people who they thirst for that title and that authority so much that they have the answer for everybody, and they want to interject their ideas to everybody without actually getting facts. So I always say, rather than giving ideas and pitching ideas, why don't you ask questions? Be in those conversations and ask questions like, well, hey, what happened the last time you did this? Or, hey, what are some things that you've tried before that maybe didn't work? Learning how to, learning a bit of the history of the issue that the person's dealing with will help you to have more of an idea of where you can maybe be of value. Don't try to give your value without first valuing them by hearing where they've come from.
That's a good point. Yeah. Brian, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about when you have a disagreement with your leader or your pastor. We're all going to be there. I've been there. I'm sure you've been there, Brian. Everybody who's listening or watching the podcast today, you've been there. Your pastor makes a call you disagree with. Your pastor heads in a direction that you may not think is the best direction, or may not be convenient to you, or may not, for whatever reason, you may disagree. Brian, you've worked with Rod 19 years. Do you still disagree anymore, or is that ship sailed? And how have you learned to handle disagreements?
Oh yeah, we disagree all the time. Probably more now than we
really
used to, because I work more closely with him, and disagree is not having a fight. Matter of fact, if you look at every disagreement as a battle, well, then you're gonna not be on that team very long. We see the value in each other's perspective, and he wants to hear when we have ideas that will help him be a better leader or help him handle a certain situation. He's open to that. He's said that over and over again. So that does help. Now, I know sometimes you have a pastor or a leader who is not very open to other viewpoints, and they kind of are one of those people of, I came down from the mountain with the tablets and you will follow, what thus saith the Lord. And I get that. Sometimes that happens. So I would say if there's a disagreement, or maybe you feel like they should have taken a different course of action, first of all, pray about it. Pray about it, because sometimes it's just your attitude that needs to change, not their decision. And I've been there where it affected me in a negative way and made things a little harder for me, even though it was the right call for the church overall. It just made me have a little more work. So I disagreed because my attitude was in a bad place. And when I prayed about it, God said, look, you're the one that needs to change, not the decision. So I did. But sometimes you pray about it and you still feel very strongly of, man, this is not going to help the church. And I feel like, I need to go talk to him. We'll do that. Because Matthew 18 spells it out. Jesus said, if you have an issue with somebody, go to them. So don't go to another staff member and start saying, well, you know what I was thinking.
So
no, you go to your pastor, you go to your leader, and you share what you're feeling or what you think, could possibly be a different course of action. But even before you do that, in my experience, I've had a lot better results when I don't go with what I say when I say, hey, you should have done this differently, or I have a problem with a decision you made. Instead, again, you ask questions. You start by just asking, hey, why did we decide to do it that way? What went into your thinking? I want to learn, because there may be reasons why they made the choice that they made that you aren't even aware of. And there may have been some things that were happening behind the scenes that you had no clue about. Matter of fact, most likely there were several things. So assume
100%.
that rather than assuming you got all the facts, and ask those questions. And then when you are presenting anything to them, especially a disagreement, present facts, not feelings. Don't go and say, well, I feel like blah, blah, blah. Well, how you feel doesn't, I guess it's relevant in a way, but when we're talking about a past decision, how you feel about it really isn't that important. We need facts. How did it affect the organization in the wrong way? How should we have handled that? Give facts, not feelings. And my pastor is famous for this line. He said, look, I want current events, not history lessons. So don't come in here and tell me, well, what you should have done is blah, blah, blah. He said, look, I open the door and let everybody be on a lot of these decisions. Well, don't hold all that information back until after I've made a decision and you think it should have been different. Give me current events, current information. And so, the important part is it's okay to have disagreements. Disagree in private, and then you agree in public. Now, that doesn't mean that you once you disagree, because here's an example, if you don't mind me telling a story.
Yep.
So, I remember years ago, there was an issue in our girls department. And I had a real clear way I thought this needed to be resolved. Yep. And I was just convinced this was the way. And Pastor Rod listened and he said, no, I really don't think that's the best course of action. He laid out the reasons why. I still disagreed, but he said, here's what we need to do. And I'm sorry, I got to stick to my guns on this, Brian. We got to do it this way, and he explained what he could, but he there's some things I just wasn't privy to know, and it wasn't appropriate for me to know.
Yeah.
But here's what happened. We went back and forth and really had a pretty heated discussion about it. But when we finished, I walked out the door and I went into the meeting with the girls department leaders, and I didn't say, guys, I went and talked to Pastor Rod and, I thought we needed to do this, but he said, we're going to do it this way. Yeah. No way. I went them and said, I talked with Pastor Rod. We looked at it from all sides. Here's what we've decided to do.
Yeah.
And it was unity. Now, it wasn't important that they needed to know I didn't think that was the way to go, or that I had other ideas. Who cares? Why would I want to, sucker punch his leadership and authority? I'm pointing over here because his office is over there. But why would I want to do that when that wasn't going to get us anywhere anyway? We'd already made a decision. And so disagree in private, never in public. And I think because years went by where I did that, he knew I was somebody he could trust. And that's what ultimately got me to a place where now I have a much broader influence in the church, and have certainly a stronger voice in his role. And so it's pretty fun when you can get there, but it only comes from a long track record of being somebody that can be trusted.
Yeah, 100%. Such wise words. Brian, what would you say to, one tension point is when you disagree with your pastor. What about you? And you've mentioned a few times, you really are blessed in that you've got a great leader that is all about the team.
Yeah.
But, I think we're both empathetic toward people that their pastor maybe isn't as much of a team player.
Right.
They maybe the pastor, the door's always shut, isn't really relational, doesn't maybe communicate real well or give much affirmation or feedback. What would you say to someone who just is in a spot right now where they feel like, and I wish I had that kind of leader, but I don't? Do you have any words of encouragement for someone like that?
Yeah, I do. I think you've got to ask yourself, number one, am I called to be here?
Mhm.
And if you are, and you know that you're called to be there and you're called to serve that leader, not every leader is an ideal leader. Matter of fact, there's no perfect leader, but not every
Good point.
leader is the ideal leader for you, or at least the way you think you would like that leader to be.
Yeah.
And so if you're called to be there, then serve wholeheartedly and look for ways to fill in the gaps. They may not, maybe their door is shut a lot. But look for areas in their life where you can serve. Maybe there's something that you can do to just fill in a gap for them and help them. I knew a guy who his pastor was just kind of one of those guys who's an old school dude. He was the first one there, and he had the keys, and he unlocked the whole church. And I mean, he spent a good 25 minutes on Sunday morning opening the church. Yeah. Well, a lot of people just assumed he liked to do that and that was just part of his personality. But, my buddy was like, I realized that's 25 minutes he could get back on a Sunday morning. And even though it's not my job, I could volunteer to get here earlier. And so he just talked to his pastor and said, I noticed you get here so early and you unlock the building. Is that something that you just have a passion for and you love? Do you love to do that? He goes, well, no, but I'm the first one here, and usually everybody else doesn't get here for 30 minutes after me. So
yeah.
He said, well, what if I got here at that time instead of you and gave you that 25 minutes back? Would that be okay? I could follow you around and learn exactly how you do it, and I'd love to do it just like you. And he was like, you do that? The pastor didn't have a passion for unlocking doors. He just knew it needed to be done, and he was handling it. So suddenly my buddy became a very valuable part of the team because his pastor didn't ask him to do it. He saw a way to fill in a gap and to just be of service. And I think if your pastor is one of those that maybe, he didn't ask you to do a lot of things, he doesn't give a lot of opportunity for you to serve. Open your eyes and look. There's spots, there's places you can serve him, serve his family. Just do a small acts of service. Mm-hmm. And I think that will build influence. Again, influence is built by relationship. And so by showing up and being there, you build relationship. And I think certainly my friend who took that over for his pastor, he found himself gaining influence and finding new opportunities because his pastor knew he was somebody he could trust and rely on.
Yeah. Well, it's really, it's serving and it's giving. I mean, you never lose when you give, do you, Brian? I think sometimes we think about giving and we think about money, but even giving of our time, giving practically, like, hey, pastor, I'll give you 25 minutes of my time. You're never going to come out the loser when you do that.
No, because he may not have anything for you, and then he very well may be in a pinch and say, man, thank you for offering. Let me tell you what you could do. But if you never say anything, they're probably not going to go chase you down and say, hey, I need help on this thing.
No, well, that's it.
Pastors are not going to do that.
No, they're not. Yeah, good point. Brian, last question before we get into the last two questions I like to ask everybody. If there's a young leader watching or listening, maybe somebody young in their 20s just getting started in a assistant kind of a role, or on a staff at a church, or even in the marketplace somewhere, and they're not in charge.
Yeah.
If you were going to give them one word of wisdom, hey, listen from Brian Dyer, I just want you listen, hear this from me, what would you say?
I would say be patient and value the process that you're in. If you have aspirations to be a leader over more, understand that the process you're in is preparing you for that future role. And don't just sit and think, well, I got to just wait. No, never underestimate the learning journey. It is a journey, not a destination. And so value that process, be patient in it, and trust that the Bible is true. If you are faithful in the little things, he will make you ruler over much. And so be faithful in the season that you're in. And as you patiently humble yourself and be faithful over the little things, God will exalt you and make you ruler over much. Be patient. That's my biggest word of knowledge.
Brian, it's been such a great practical conversation. I always like to end the podcast with these two questions.
Okay.
First, Brian, I'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Bible story and why?
My favorite Bible story
Yes.
out of the entire Bible.
Out of the entire Bible.
I would say Peter's redemption story in John 21, where after he's blown it and denied Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus just gently restores him back by giving him the instruction of feeding his sheep, feeding his lambs. I've been that guy who has blown it big time and failed royally and just thought everything was over, like I imagine Peter probably felt. And so I identify with him, and the gentle way that Jesus restores Peter without even mentioning his failure just kind of blows my mind when I read that. And it sets an example for me that I want to be that kind of leader who's so filled with grace and has so much mercy when somebody blows it. I want to be ready to grant that same grace and mercy to others that I have been blessed with by the Lord and by the leaders that I serve. So that Peter redemption story in John 21 is probably one that stands out to me the most and that I hold dear in my heart.
And I will say you have blown it a lot, Brian. You should write a book by that title sometime.
As a matter of fact, I did.
You did, didn't you?
I did.
I blew it.
Yeah.
Has that been? I bet that's been 5 years ago. Has that been 5 years?
You're way off.
No.
It's 10 years ago.
Has it been 10 years?
Yeah. And matter of fact, I know the second question you ask everybody is, what's something big you're working on? Well, since you just mentioned it.
Is it I Blew It Part 2?
Well, no, not part 2, but I actually, and my publisher just reverted the publishing rights back to me. Ooh. And so I'm actually working on a revised and expanded version of I Blew It. I got 2 extra chapters that I've added.
How neat.
Yeah. And obviously I wrote that kind of to celebrate 20 years of ministry and all the biggest mistakes that I'd made in those first 20 years and how others can avoid them. And so now I got 10 extra years of perspective on some of those mistakes. And, I'm able to speak even a little more clear into the long lasting reverberations of not only failure, but also restoration and learning lessons from big failures. And so I'll actually be releasing that later this year. It'll be a revised and expanded version of I Blew It. New cover, all that good stuff.
Do you think you'll have it for the Kids Matter conference?
That'd be great. I'd love to. If I need to hurry things up, you just let me know and we'll.
I think it'd be great. So each chapter, does it cover like a different thing? I blew it in this area and here's what I learned from it.
Yeah, so every chapter kind of starts off with a personal story from my first 20 years of ministry, and really different leadership failures, but even hard issues and emotional issues that I had to struggle with and deal with because ministry's hard, that. In full-time ministry, and especially on a long-term staff, you're going to have some relational stuff, some difficult emotional and leadership mistakes and failures. And there's even a time where in 2008 where I was real close to losing everything. Like I just had blown it so bad, I nearly lost my job, my ministry, my family, everything. And to be able to come back from that, and I say come back, to be able to be restored by the Lord and by my team and my family.
I love it.
Be able to come back from a failure like that. There's a lot of lessons that you learn along that journey, and that's a lot of what I've added in this revised and expanded version. And I think it's something that whether they're kids ministry, youth ministry, any staff member will be blessed by this book, because it's all about avoiding the pitfalls that are so commonly fallen into by staff members along the way.
Yeah.
And now I'm at a little over 30 years of full-time ministry, and I'm ready to help people that I don't want them to have to feel the pain themselves. Learn through my pain, learn through my mistakes, and learn those before you make the mistakes yourself.
Well, it's Brian Dollar. Brian, thank you. I know you're a busy man these days, but thank you for saying yes to my invitation to come on the podcast. Thanks for being my friend. Thank you for being a great pastor at your church, creating such great content to bless churches, thousands and thousands of churches all around the globe. We wish you nothing but the best. I know God's not done with you yet.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day, Brian. Thanks again.
You too.
This episode of the Ryan Frank Podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more conversations to help you stay on the leading edge. And if you like what you've heard, please rate this podcast with 5 stars. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you next time.